You're listening to The Back 40, the podcast for Ontario farmers, covering topics and issues that matter most to Ontario agriculture. Brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. The topic of preservation of farmland was a major topic when I was going to school, which is more years ago than I'd like to remember. At that time, there was great concern that we were going to lose a lot of our farmland, city sprawl, and being paved under as places like in our area, London or Guelph or Toronto expanded. In more recent years, it hasn't been in the news as much, but that may change in the future here. Today, we're talking with Cathy Lennon from the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. Cathy, welcome to the Back 40.
Thank you, Mike.
So for those people that are listening that don't know who Cathy Lennon is, tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be here today. So Perth County, Ontario, Canada is my home. I am the general manager of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. I have a bit of a wandering career path to get me here. I started out with a diploma in legal administration from Fanshawe College in London. And then I actually spent about 5 years working at a family counseling agency in Stratford. From there, I decided to go back to university, the University of Waterloo, where I took political science and economics. That led me to taking a co-op position in agriculture. And not unlike today, where there are 4 jobs for every University of Guelph graduate, at that time in 96 or 97, there were far more jobs posted at the University of Guelph than they had students to fill them. So that's how I found myself a career in agriculture. So I've had a bit of a path from there. I started out at the Agricultural Adaptation Council. Worked for a couple of commodity organizations where I did serve as general manager, so Ontario Sheep Farmers, as well as Ontario Processing Vegetable Growers. And I also took a term in government with Agricorp and about 10 or 11 years in finance with Farm Credit Canada before I came to OA.
That leaves you with quite a background of experience there that leaves you in a really good spot for the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. Can you give us just a little bit of an overview of what you do on a daily and yearly basis for Ontario farmers?
So the Ontario Federation of Agriculture is the largest general farm organization in Ontario. It's a farmer-led board of directors, 18 individuals from all across the province who represent and champion the interests of Ontario farmers. And so that is everything from government relations, farm policy, research, community representation, media relations, and member support. So just about any topic that you read about in the paper on a weekly basis that touches food or farming, the OFA somehow is involved in that issue as well.
It's great to have someone there that can advocate on behalf of farmers in Ontario, and your organization does a really great job of that. When it comes to the preservation of farmland, and most of us look outside and we see there's lots of farmland there, and Ontario is a large province. Canada is a huge country, second largest country in the world. So why are we worried about whether or not we lose the farmland? Because we've got lots of land here.
We do have lots of land here, but I think a statistic that is maybe not that well known is less than 5% of the land in Ontario is actually suitable for agriculture. So while we are a gigantic province and a significantly large country, there's actually a very small amount of land that can be used to grow crops and livestock across the province. So that's why it's very important to us.
Yes, and in the farming community, there's a saying, they're not making any more land. And that drives a lot of our land prices when people are bidding on it. But when you get closer to the large urban centers, that becomes more of an issue as far as preserving that farmland.
That's right. Agricultural land is obviously a finite and shrinking resource. I like your comment that they don't make any more land, I think is another one they say. So from 1996 till 2016, Ontario lost 1.5 million acres of farmland. And to break that down, because that's hard to visualize, what is 1.5 million acres of land? It's about 175 acres of land every single day throughout that period. A way to envision that, the typical farm here in Ontario is about 250 acres. So 200, 250 acres, somewhere in that range. So 175 acres of farmland taken out of production every single day is almost the equivalent of one family farm every day, fewer in this province.
Wow. A lot of that land that we're losing is some of the best farmland that we've got as well, isn't it?
That's right. Ontario is a tremendous, diverse province. We have a significant amount of high quality farmland all across the province. And our goal at OFA, something we are very committed to, is preserving and protecting the areas that raise and grow our fruits and vegetables, meat and dairy products, crops and livestock for future generations.
And that's a lot of what we're talking about here. Like for you and I, we're not going to run out of farmland, hopefully in our lifetime there, but there's future generations to consider here as well.
That's right. I think this topic of farmland protection is as important, if not more important, than, a topic that's gained a lot of steam in the last number of years is climate change. So people are cognizant of the impact of climate change on the earth. And when they think about climate change, a degree this year, it's not going to make any difference, right? Really. But 1 degree each year or every couple of years over a long period of time, we know that the long-term consequences are significant. And people have been able to envision that. And I think that farmland protection deserves that same sort of cognizance, that it's not about today's farmers or today's consumers. It's about our future, about our grandkids, about our province 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 200 years from now. We want to have the ability to grow and process our own food supply here in our province.
Yes, to put it in a little bit of perspective, I started dating the lady who's my wife now over 30 years ago, and she's from Mississauga and grew up just about on the Etobicoke border. The subdivision is at the corner of 427 and QEW. And the property that her house was built on was an asparagus farm. At that time, there were still orchards in that area. Not very many of them, not very much, but it was still there. If you go back to the late 40s, my father actually worked running gravel trucks in that area, building up roads. Center of Mississauga, Highway 10 and Highway 5, at that time was a gas station on a corner and a stop sign. And that was it. Today, for anyone that's familiar with that area, that is all built up area. That farmland has been lost in the process of 75 years.
It is hard to imagine, isn't it, thinking of that as farmland?
It is. And we kind of take for granted that that's the way where the city is now. But not that long ago, that was productive farmland. And it's close to the lake. It's great on heat units. It's great for vegetable and orchard crops. And we've already lost that. So the question becomes, if we don't do anything, where are we going to be 50 years from now?
That's right. And one of the things that we've kept an eye on for sure in that regard is, and I think it really was brought to light in the pandemic right now is, some people use the terms food security, or the words local food have been trendy in the last number of years, people looking to buy their food closer to home. And I think that self-sufficiency has been heightened this year as we look at our grocery store shelves and we look at our communities and we say, we want to know that we have a steady supply of consistent high quality food that is grown and processed close to home. One reason is because it's economical and it's efficient, and a number of those environmental factors associated with travel. We'd like to reduce our carbon footprint, so sourcing local is all sort of part of that. But I think our awareness about the need to be able to be self-sustaining. It's food. We've also seen it in areas like vaccine production or manufacturing of personal protective equipment, PPE, in the last year. We've started as Canadians and all across the world to say, hey, we don't want to be reliant on another country or another even province for the things that we need in our community. So it's important for us to focus on, if that's important to Ontarians, to Canadians, to have a local domestic food supply, what do we need to do to make sure we have that? And a land base to produce crops and to raise livestock is imperative.
It's interesting to note, I've seen various statistics on where we rank as far as a food exporting country. We typically rank in the top 5. And I've seen estimates there that those numbers are going to go down over the next 30 years, where we're going to see more and more countries that are importing our food. And those are countries that can't feed themselves. Those are countries that rely on somebody else to supply that food.
That's right. And as the, whether that's today or in 50 years from now. It's true. And there are actually a number of developed countries today that don't have the ability to produce and in some cases process their own domestic food supply. Some that come to mind immediately are the UK, Netherlands, and Japan. Already their population is such that they require a significant amount of food to be imported into their countries to feed their population. Ontario and Canada is incredibly fortunate that we are able to produce not only enough for our own population, but we are an exporting country, and it is certainly something to be proud of and has made us a leader, as you said, in the top 5 for exporting nations for food. And certainly an opportunity to grow as we pull ourselves out of this, pandemic. I think that the agriculture and agri-food community is one that has the opportunity to build and bring us out of that, grow food, export food, and support not only our own country, but people around the world with high quality, nutritious food.
And many people aren't aware of just how important agriculture is to this country. We know that we export. We know that it's part of our economy, but it's more than just a sideshow here. It's a major part of our economy, isn't it?
It sure is. Right here in Ontario, they say the number is 860,000 people. So just shy of 1 million people in our province are working in some aspect of the agri-food and agriculture industry. And our contribution to the GDP is $47 billion annually. So it is significant. It is huge. It's a powerhouse in Ontario for sure, the agriculture and agri-food sector.
Now, recently, we've seen in the news people talking about growing their own food within the confines of urban centers, whether it's gardens in their backyard or in some cases on the rooftops. We've seen vertical farming that people start to talk about there. Is that going to be sufficient to take the place of what we produce on our farmland?
It is absolutely not going to be sufficient to feed the world, to feed all of our communities, people who aren't able or capable or interested in growing their own food. But certainly it is an exciting opportunity that people, in urban centers or properties where they can plant a garden, they can experiment with it, flowers or fruits, berries, tomatoes, to see the experience. And I know a lot of kids 4-H clubs, and I know Farm and Food Care Ontario is currently marketing a garden in a box. So people can give it a try and see what it's like, to plan, to schedule, to plant their crop, and then to experience the challenges that a farmer experiences, right? Whether that is an early frost or too much heat, too much water, invasion of pests or disease, right? The things that farmers experience on a broad, large scale on their farm, I think it's a real awareness building tool for us to be able to have consumers who have an experience of, I tried to grow tomatoes on my balcony. And actually last year was a fantastic year and I had a busting crop. And the next year I didn't, I don't know what happened. It's all very good to support people in their own journeys to understand food and food production and to enjoy the produce of their own labors.
I can speak from experience there, the joys of planting a crop and watching it grow and harvesting it, and also the difficulties when I can remember pulling white beans. As I turned to go out of the field, a large black cloud came over and rained on 50 acres of pulled beans, and I didn't get back in the field for 6 weeks. That sort of connection that you can get, as you say, a tomato plant that this year I had great luck. But the year before, there was nothing there. There was absolutely nothing. That certainly is going to provide more of a connection to what farmers face on a day-to-day basis there.
And even predators, you can have someone who plants a small garden for the first time in their backyard, and they see that this is just about ready to harvest. This is going to be perfect. I'm going to enjoy that salad on Friday night, only to find out that the bunnies arrived or the squirrels and took the best of what you produced in your small garden or garden box. And those are the realities.
Yeah, there's nothing like going out for lettuce and finding it's all been clipped by somebody else. Do you like what you're hearing from the Back 40? We'd like to hear from you. Send us an email with your comments and thoughts to theback40@trilliummutual.com or follow us on social media @Trillium Mutual. So, what is currently being done as far as preservation of farmland in Ontario?
So I think there's two things that the Ontario Federation of Agriculture speaks very strongly in favor of in terms of, how do we actually accomplish this protection and preservation of farmland? So the first one is strong overall provincial policy. So we want the government to establish standards all across the province, corner to corner to corner, that say we value farmland and this is how it will or will not be developed. These are the terms and conditions under which it is acceptable to see that happen. I mean, obviously there's going to be development. OFA is strongly in support of, long-term care homes and affordable housing and manufacturing facilities close to home. We need all of those things, but let's make sure they're in the right places in our communities, in brownfields, or let's look at opportunities for urban intensification. Build up rather than out is something that people often refer to. And then the other thing that we speak strongly for in this regard is an agricultural impact assessment. So in your community, when there is a project underway that is looking, for land needs to move forward, to really encourage communities to take a close look at what will this mean for farmland, for neighboring farmers, because sometimes some of the issues aren't just the loss of farmland directly. That's a big one, but it can be when development moves into a farm community, and then you hear of things like, well, the neighbors didn't appreciate the smell or the sound or the dust or the light in some cases. So we want to make sure that when we look at development, it's in the right place, that it's not encroaching on farmland, that it's not taking farmland out of production. We want to be good neighbors. We want to respect our neighbors and make sure that everybody is comfortable and happy. But sometimes if you move a development out into an agricultural community, they need to understand where they are going to end up, which is in the middle of a production of some kind that produces dust or noise, smell, extra traffic, trucks going in and out as product is delivered in or out.
If we only have 5% of our land in Ontario that is prime agricultural land, why not move north? Why not build somewhere where there is no farmland?
So that's certainly, it comes with pros and cons. There's a number of areas in the province where you can look and say, well, this would be a great place to establish and grow a business. And it comes down to many outside factors like access to highways and infrastructure, internet, municipal services, access to customers. There's a strong desire for a lot of development and expansion to happen in the greater Golden Horseshoe, that area around Toronto, Burlington, Mississauga, Niagara. And it's because very quick and easy access to major highways, to borders for those that are looking to export products or finished goods, employment. So labor. So if I'm wanting to build a new facility, I want to make sure that wherever I put it, it's going to have close and immediate access to people to work in those jobs. So what that means is you end up with all of the desire to develop and grow in a finite geographical area. But there definitely are opportunities to look at which of those developments could make sense in Eastern Ontario or Northern Ontario, or in places where potentially it isn't the most productive and viable agricultural land. Now, there is fantastic farmland in Eastern and Northern Ontario. And then there's also areas that are, rocks and trees. And maybe we can do more in those areas.
It's a little bit of a chicken and the egg situation, though. Do you get the people there first so there's a labor force and an infrastructure, or do you plan to move the businesses there and then move the people there afterwards?
Definitely true. And as a business, looking at creating a business plan, many of those things, so just picking up on some of my 10 years in ag finance, when someone comes forward with a business plan and says, this is my business plan, whether it's for a farm or a factory or a retail store, you have to look at who's my competition, what's my labor supply, what's my customer base, and you need to make sure that you can address all of those things and in a time frame. And not usually can you say, we're going to build it, and hope they come, right? You've got to know that you can attract the customers. You can have your inputs and exports delivered and received out of your facility, and that you will have employees and you will have customers. So some of it all has to come together at the same time.
Your investors and your lenders don't really like that. Take it on faith. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. Not always, not always. If you build it, they will come, someone said, but I'm not sure that's always true.
I think people would prefer to risk someone else's money on that bet, though. I don't think that's something that they necessarily want to run their own money out there for.
Yeah, there's some really exciting examples though of food processing. So as I mentioned early in the podcast, I did work with the Ontario Processing Vegetable Growers for a number of years, and we have seen some exciting investment in food processing outside of that GTA or Greater Golden Horseshoe. So London, Ontario has become a bit of a hotbed for food processing and food innovation. So Dr. Otker has placed a facility there, and I just read something about a facility that is going to be established there that is processing crickets. In the small town of Wallaceburg down in Lambton County, there is a newly established processing plant for pickles. So Stubbs Pickles is a label that we used to process here in Ontario at Brantford, and they had centralized all of their processing in Quebec for a number of years, but they've recognized the value of being located in the heart of farmland. So a lot of processing cucumbers are grown in southwestern Ontario, so they can be picked and delivered for processing in a very efficient manner. It's exciting to have a food processor established in Wallaceburg. It's jobs, it's close to home, it's domestic food production, and it's actually making use of an old building that was already there. So it wasn't a new build. They didn't take any farmland out of production. They found an existing facility and said, hey, we can retrofit this, and it can be active today.
That's a good news story, because once we pave it over, there's no getting it back again. Whether or not we take a factory down 30, 40, 50 years from now, the chances are that land will never go back to being farmland again.
That's right.
And it's also, it's worth noting here too, that the very land that we like to grow crops on because it's flat and well drained and there's no rocks, that's the same land that people like to build on because there's no rocks, there's nothing there. We can just go in and build.
That's right. You can dig deep and put your foundation in. And
so I mentioned before, there have been some attempts here to protect farmland in the past. How effective has that been? Is that something that has been particularly effective, or is that something that we need to put other things in place to protect the land?
I think a number of communities actually across the province have done a really good job in sort of making local growth plans, working, municipal councillors with their agricultural community. They've looked at making plans out to 2030, 2050. What do we think this community can and should look like? What do we need to protect? And identifying proactively the areas that are best suited for and available for development. It's been an incredibly worthwhile practice. It takes a long time, lots of stakeholder consultation, lots of research, lots of time, but some really strong, well thought out plans have been made to ensure that all of those things are taken into consideration. And we think that more time should be spent. No quick decisions like, oh yes, this seems like a good idea. So that committed process by municipalities and communities and agricultural stakeholders to really look ahead, what's the window and where is the best place for development, and when and how, and do we have the infrastructure to support it? Those conversations and that really strategic planning is really valuable, and we embrace more of that.
Some people will say that sounds like a lot more red tape, but it's really important when you're talking about a finite resource, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. It takes time, it takes energy, and it takes money, but just honing back to that, only 5% of the province of Ontario is arable and available for food production. That's a tiny smidgen. And so really, every piece of it is worth protecting if we want to be a province which is self-sufficient and a country which is self-sufficient in food production well into the future, 2050, 2075, pick a date. It won't be you and I, Mike. It'll be someone else who is trying to figure out how are they going to feed themselves and their families and their communities.
But where we can't figure out how to feed them, our actions can certainly stop their ability to be able to feed themselves.
That's right. And there's so many good examples of that, sort of looking ahead, and I draw on things like, the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago. The second best time is today. Protecting farmland, the best time was probably also 30 or 50 years ago, and the second best time is today. So, we need to keep our eye on that and say this is an incredibly valuable resource. It can't be brought back after it's given away to development. So we got to hang on to it.
One of the quotes that I've used it myself, but I've heard it many years ago, was that we don't buy our farmland from our parents, we borrow it from our children. And if we keep that firmly in front of us, that can really color a lot of what we do with that farmland and how we protect it.
That's a beautiful way of thinking about it, I think, borrowing it from our children.
I'm not in a position where I can blame my parents for any of this, but I can protect it for my children. I can make a difference on that. And if it's not my children, somebody's going to be using that farmland to produce food. It's not like that just because someone in my family isn't interested, nobody else will be interested. The price of farmland shows that there's still quite a demand for it.
And while it is quite likely that the future may bring opportunity for our food to be produced exclusively in petri dishes or labs or factories, right? That possibility is there. But I think as people more and more, we have placed value on production practices and local food and farming and safe and nutritious and healthy food. And I believe that people want that to be outdoors and outside with local farmers and local families producing that food. We don't want to go to the grocery store and push some buttons and have some petri dishes of nutrition dropped out for us, right? So while it's possible, it's not what we want. So we have to keep our eye on that.
There's a lot of exciting technology that's coming down the pipe, and we read about meat substitutes and other products that are being made in a lab. But we're nowhere in the position right now where we're going to be able to say, hey, we can just forget about our farmland because we're going to be able to do all that in a factory. Somebody told me once that don't think of your crop as a product. Think of it as a solar collector, because we do need to. It collects energy and resources that we use for food, and that takes area. And how we look after that area is really important to us, isn't it?
That's right. Yep.
So where do you think we're going to be in 50 years? Are we going to be successful in preserving our farmland? Is that something that you're optimistic about?
I am. I think that there is increased awareness, not just among the agricultural community, but among consumers and government and otherwise, about the value of protecting and preserving farmland. And farmers continue to be the definition of innovation, producing more yield with less inputs. And that doesn't matter whether it's grain or livestock, the whole continuum. There is a focus on research and best practices, creating efficiencies, improving the environment. So I definitely see the agriculture and agri-food community will rise to the challenge and deliver the agri-food system that we need in 50 years.
That's good to hear. I'm probably not going to be here to see it, but I'm optimistic as well. I think that we've always risen to the challenge, and there's certainly, as you mentioned, farmers and technology. There's nobody like farmers for wanting to adopt new technology. The latest gadgets and the latest techniques are something that farmers just absolutely love to incorporate into their businesses.
That's right. So even as the population grows, we can and will produce more on fewer acres. So I think if we can protect the resource of farmland that we have now and be more efficient and effective with that farmland, we can meet the rising population. But we really do, I think, need to wrap our arms around the land that we've got now and preserve it.
So if people want to find out more information about Ontario Federation of Agriculture and what they do, and including this topic, where can they find that information?
So on our website, www.ofa.on.ca, and we're also on Twitter @Ontario Farms, and you can follow me personally on Twitter @Cathy_Lennon.
That's awesome. It's been great talking to you today, Kathy. We've been speaking with Cathy Lennon, General Manager for the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. Join us next time when our guest will be Jen Fanning from Fanning's Organic Vegetables, and we'll be talking about migrant workers and some of the issues that they face as they come in for this season of work. You've been listening to The Back 40, brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance. Be sure to subscribe to The Back 40 wherever you find your favorite podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. The Back 40, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm Mike Brine. Until next time, take care and stay safe.